Russ, I lost you guys. I lost the audio.
First of all, we need a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So passes. Thank you.
Missed it now.
Seeing no one here from the public. I don't think we need a citizen's privilege. Do we know, Russell, if anybody on YouTube watching?
Hold on a sec. Give me a sec.
They can't interact. No, they can't talk to us. No, YouTube.
Oh, but I just want to know
They
something.
can make comments.
Like a text comment?
Okay, so, thank you. So moving on to new business and the presentation of the fiscal year 26 general fund and water fund operating budget and 5-year capital improvement program. You're on.
Okay, thank you. Well, Mayor and Council and anybody participating remotely, Carol Haupt, Town Manager. We're happy to be here today to share the highlights of our proposed FY26 operating budget. This budget represents the 7th that Finance Director Dawn Parks and I, along with our departments and various councils, have worked on together. Things are changing, but this year we're also hoping to set the stage for making some proactive adjustments that allow us to maintain service levels and continue to operate as an engaged, professionally run and responsive town. Our story seems to be playing out as we've discussed. Ocean View remains fiscally sound, it's safe, it's clean. We're working on community-focused projects such as our sidewalk installs in the Birds and Natural area. We've strived to increase sense of community, and we're starting to see the anticipated constrictions to our revenue streams. Later today, we will discuss options and opportunities that we believe will help us successfully navigate into the out years. Mayor and Council, I've had the proposed budget since earlier this month, and it's been posted on the website. Questions that have come in before today have been logged and responded to and are also available on our website. It's my understanding that we'll hold questions until after I finish. About 14 slides, shouldn't take too long. And then we can open up to Mayor and Council and if anybody from the public has any questions. So the key objectives and assumptions that are included in the proposed budget are, the proposed budget is balanced and represents an operating budget totaling 6.3 million and a capital program totaling 1.6 million. We're recommending a 2-cent tax rate increase, which will take our tax rate from 0.2378 per 100 assessed value to 0.2578. This FY26 proposed tax rate increase is therefore 1 cent less than the tax rate in FY22. The proposed tax rate increase comes following our holding our existing rate for 3 years after reducing the rate by 3 cents the prior year after our full town reassessment. I'd like to share that in total, over the last 8 years, including this FY26 proposed budget, Ocean View's total tax rate increase has been 9.3 cents. Again, inclusive of FY19, when an 8.3 cent increase was put in place, and the FY23 3-cent decrease. In addition, the proposed budget includes a cost of living increase of 3% for employees, excluding contractual employees, myself and the chief. We have included an across-the-board $3,000 pay increase for sworn officers, aligned with moving a starting salary to $68,000 for new officers. And lastly, contractually negotiated salary increases for both the chief of police and myself. There are some limited fee schedule modifications, and we have included health insurance premium increases of 4.1%. And lastly, not on this slide, but worth mentioning, we've maintained a seasonal code employee, summer weekend front desk support for our OBPD, and maintaining 2 part-time public works positions that were formerly temporary. Here we have an overall summary slide of the proposed FY26 budget, including operating and capital projects, as well as our current forecast for the out years. We're forecasting revenue available for operations, as noted earlier, at 6.3, and expenses of 6.37, before the proposed utilization of unassigned fund balance totaling 69,500 for 2 one-time expenses to conduct 2 studies, thereby balancing the budget. We'll discuss the studies in a little bit. The emerging projects line will come off after this year, as we will spend down this balance in FY26. You will also note in the second to the last line, a declining unassigned fund balance forecasted for our out years, knowing what we know right now. For reference, the minimum recommended 2 months of operational reserves in our unassigned fund balance is valued at approximately $331,000 for FY26. So if all things stayed exactly the same, cost to operate, etc., by FY30, our unassigned fund balance would be reduced to approximately 2 months, the recommended minimum level. But we all know that all things will not stay the same, and that we will be working annually together through the budget process to address out years and our reserves. Our financial forecast effort recently completed should help with this as well. As you're aware, we've been recommending maintaining between 4 and 6 months of unassigned fund balance, which I believe has served us well and enabled the town to react to unforeseen needs, and with the approval of mayor and council. On that point, and a bit timely, it's very likely we will need to utilize unassigned fund balance at the end of this fiscal year to supplement the cost of providing snow removal services this season. We wanted to also highlight some additional points from the prior slide in relationship to a year-over-year comparison. In relationship to grants, we budget for sure things, such as the funds we get annually from the state or the county. But as you know, our departments are aggressively seeking grants each year and have been very successful. Any additional grants will have a positive impact or allow us to do more than we currently anticipate being able to do. In 2024, I'm happy to say we were awarded $1.5 million in grant monies. Street repair and replacement trust fund monies and capital improvement program expenditures are less in FY26 as a result of our determination that we're in the position to spread work out to future years. This is a direct result of the level of street, sidewalk, and stormwater work completed in recent years. I can also share that over the last 5 years, we have committed just under $1.9 million to street repair and replacement. Maintaining our infrastructure is key to a thriving community. This next slide outlines the FY26 to FY30 capital program. The capital program helps us identify out-year needs early and plan for the future capital spending. Of course, the out years are based on what we know right now and are subject to change in relationship to cost estimates. They're fine-tuned for each fiscal year when the budget is proposed. The Capital Replacement Trust Fund is maintained at the annual level identified in our reserve study. It's funded by transfer tax revenue at 12.5%, but if this funding source isn't sufficient any given year to meet the reserve study annual required contribution, then general fund or unassigned fund balance will likely need to be tapped. For more detail, the full capital plan begins on page 141. And lastly, there are no water utility projects for FY 26, and we expect the utility to be sold in the next few months. Its sale was approved by the Public Service Commission last week. Before we finalized the proposed budget and put it in the hands of you, our mayor and council, and made it publicly available, there was a need to increase the tax rate by nearly 3 cents. This slide shows the trimming we did to bring it down to the 2-cent increase that was previously discussed and has been proposed. The cuts amount to the value of $119,000. You may recall last year we cut $2,000 in order to not increase the tax rate at all in FY 25. The cuts included a COLA reduction from the CPI-U Mid-Atlantic rate of 3.315 to 3%, as well as cuts from each department. We also proposed the use of unassigned fund balance, as mentioned earlier, for the one-time cost of consulting service for the police department compensation and risk analysis studies. A good example of how the unassigned fund balance can help to address one-time needs, especially timely needs like these 2 studies. In addition, not a cut. However, the proposed budget includes a change from 5% to 6% for gross rental receipts tax charged those who rent their properties. This went into effect for January 25 billing and was approved by Mayor and Council in 2024. This slide represents the FY 26 revenue projection. Property tax revenue remains our largest revenue stream. This is true for most towns and cities. In regards to transfer tax revenue, our property values are holding fairly steady, although some decline is being noticed in relationship to corrections from the peak values of 2020 through 23. We also still see strong existing home sales, while new construction sales are down. We should see a boost in FY 26 associated with 2 new developments starting, Shore Vista and Silverwoods. And we forecasted for these developments in the proposed budget. In tracking this data since May of 24, our current fiscal year, through January 25, last month, our transfer tax revenue breakdown is 64.6% from existing home resales and 27.7% from new construction. This information is also reported monthly in our financial report. We put this slide together to drive home the point of where our tax rate is now and how we've attempted to levelize the tax rate while continuing to raise the much needed funds to operate and provide desired services. As already mentioned, we're entering this next budget year proposing a 2-cent tax rate increase. Of course, our full town reassessment that hit the 23 tax year and its increase to property values allowed for the 3-cent rate reduction at the time. So while individual assessments may have increased or decreased as a result of the value of one's property, the improvements they've made, etc., maintaining our property values benefits both the town and our property owners. Having the full reassessment as a code requirement every 5 years keeps us up to date and provides the opportunity to attempt to levelize the impact and ensure everyone is paying their fair share. As Sussex County completes its full reassessment, they're actually in their appeals process right now. We can compare and analyze the benefits of the town utilizing the county's assessments versus having our own town assessor. But first, we want to make sure that there will be no huge or unanticipated consequences for doing so. There would be savings to the town if we were able to do so. And we anticipate the need for some level of tax rate increases in the out years, with 1 cent plugged in for this budget proposal for each year FY 27 through FY 30. So we pulled the current values of 6 properties from different districts in Ocean View in an effort to show the impact of the proposed 2-cent rate increase. The range runs from an increase of $54.84 to an increase of $126.70 for FY 26. And that would be the May of 2025 billing. To be clear, these are samples, as assessments are specific again to each property, but hopefully provides an ideal of impact. Anyone interested in the impact can take their current town assessment and billing and calculate it, and we'd be very happy if they call the office to help them if they need the help. Again, our assessed value is based on $100 of assessed value. Here's a pie chart showing our expenses. They're also listed out below in order of how our divisions show up in the budget document. Public safety, the Ocean View Police Department continues to be our largest expense. This is typical of police departments, as they often also represent the highest number of employees by department, which is the case for Ocean View as well. With that said, Ocean View has been reaping the benefit of our police department's efforts and operations. The Ocean View Police Department's strong community policing model, professionalism, and commitment to training plays a prime role in Ocean View consistently being recognized as one of the safest places to live in the state of Delaware. The year-over-year expenses increases by department are shown on this slide. Again, our police department has seen the most growth, with rising costs to recruit and retain officers, train, equip, and address unfunded mandates. The town of Ocean View, like many towns and cities, participates with the state of Delaware health insurance plans. As noted in our earlier slide, we were advised by the state benefit office that the premium increase of 4.1% was anticipated. We're hopeful that that will remain that way. You may recall last year there was a change prior to our approval of the budget. Following our approval of the budget that we had to address. We have also continued the practice of town employees paying the same employee share toward premium rates as that of state employees for the plan they choose. And we've maintained the council-supported funding of short-term disability, dental, and vision, and of course, the new paid family leave program. Delaware Paid Family Leave Insurance Plan. We provided some basic information here for you to get familiar with what it is. This new law goes into full effect in January of 2026. Ocean View also falls in the 25+ employee headcount, so all lines of coverage are required. If we participated in the state's plan, we would have had to begin funding it in January of this year. However, in December of last year, our application to utilize a private insurance carrier's plan beginning in January of 26 was approved by the state. January of 26 is when claims against the new Delaware Paid Family Medical Leave law may begin. That means this unfunded mandate impacts 4 months for our FY 26 fiscal year. The new expense impact for FY 26 is $5,400 for 4 months, and it's included in our life and disability line items. A full year of premium for this new requirement will cost us approximately $16,117, and our rates with Guardian are guaranteed for 2 years. Before the next renewal, we plan to revisit this and then determine the need for any employee cost share requirement, likely with the development of the FY 27 budget. There are limits to what qualify as a claim, and the maximum paid out is $900 a week. So while there is little impact for FY 26, more consideration will be given how we fit it into our overall benefit offerings going forward. As you know, we update our services at a glance document annually. John West Park is our location for community events. We have listed here our known events for FY 26. We continue to maintain partnerships that benefit our town, as noted here. New last year, Custom Fit 360 began offering exercise classes in our park, and we have a new yoga program lined up for outdoor yoga this summer. We are also now a regular location for the Blood Bank of Delaware Donation Days. And as you know, a robust fundraising effort is underway to help support keeping the very popular Cops and Goblins event free. Briefly, I wanted to share some information on some key issues we've been working on. First, the sale of the town's small water distribution system. Approximately 900 properties are on the system, which since development in 2006 has always been fully outsourced. The benefits of the sale are the elimination of all town debt. Our only debt currently is the water system. And also the elimination of risk associated with responsibility for a utility that we have little to no oversight. Plus, town system properties will be absorbed into a larger customer base subject to the Public Service Commission oversight and rate approvals. We've been considering and hope to launch in May, with the approval of the budget, 2 studies associated with the Ocean View Police Department. One is a compensation study that will fully explore the compensation of our competitor agencies, not only starting salaries, but all compensation. This has been a very difficult item to keep up with in recent years, and there is much misinformation shared. The goal of this study is to fully know where we stand in comparison in advance to making any recommendations related to pay scales, and with full knowledge of our ability to pay. This would be conducted by PFM. The second is a legal and risk analysis to be performed by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. This will provide insight related to Ocean View's somewhat unique situation of being dispatched by the state of Delaware to areas out of town and even into an incorporated town, that of Millville, our neighboring town. Ocean View has discussed this for some time. We have expressed concern for liability for this. We have approached Millville about support to no avail and engaged the Delaware State Police about concerns. But the goal of this study is to get solid information to better understand our risk so we can make conscious decisions going forward that are in the best interest of the town of Ocean View. Lastly, our 2-part financial analysis, part 1, the diagnosis, completed earlier this year, and part 2, recommendations, are now complete. We'll have a presentation by PFM on the recommendations after we respond to any questions on the budget. So with that, I thank you for your time and your attention. And we'd be very happy to answer any questions at this time. We do have a couple members out for personal reasons. Our department directors, Ken Simino and Matt Martin. And if we're unable to answer any questions that they would be better suited to answer, we will get back to you, but hopefully that won't be the case.
Thank you, Carol. Very good presentation of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone have questions or comments on the budget presentation?
Mr. Mayor, I have some questions. Is this the time to ask them or?
This is the time, Steve.
Okay. Okay. Carol, great job on the presentation. A lot of the things that I had to ask or I had written down. So some of these are just real quick yeses and no. The next property assessment for the town of Ocean View is done in 2027.
Correct.
Okay. And on page 42 to 49, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and we'll have explored the opportunity of going to the county's assessment prior to that, so we'll know in advance.
Yes. On page 42 and 49, glad to see that only 3 of the scheduled fee increases have gone up. Is that correct? Only 3?
Yes, I believe it's 3, yes.
Very good. When the fees are paid and they come into the town, they're coded. And can we see a printout of all revenue received by code from last year? There's 5.5 pages of fees. Are all them bringing in revenue? Some of them obviously a lot more than others. But can we see this year or last year what each fee brought in terms of gross dollars?
We should be.
Well, some of them go to like reimbursement.
Some of them go to reimbursements.
I understand.
You're on the mic.
Yeah, I mean, we do have, and in the budget, it does show last year's. But like if you're looking under, let's say labels and lists. No, I cannot print out something that tells you how many labels were requested.
I understand that, but can you tell me how much monies was received in that labels and lists?
Yeah.
I'm
We
sorry?
would be able to, we would
Yeah,
be
that-
able to do that.
Good. And the reason I asked that question, interesting to look at, and if there's any fees listed on that schedule that gets zero revenue, then maybe we can eliminate it. But anyways, thank you. On page 78, what category does income from fees fall into? And on page 78.
I didn't catch.
On page 78, your question is, where do fees fall into? The revenues by source?
Yes.
It should
Well,
be.
it depends on if there are fines, miscellaneous. You know, if they come from, most of them would be under miscellaneous or charges for services.
Okay, well, I'm one of those type of people, when you have revenue of $396,000 or $220,000 and it's under miscellaneous, that doesn't give me much detail. So maybe this refers back to my first question about getting a printout of revenue by code or fee. I'm sorry.
So you'd like more detail for what makes up the miscellaneous section?
like-
So
I like-
but you want everything.
Yes, but if that's not that hard to do. And then in preparing the budget, Carol, the mention of contract services comes up quite a bit. And some of these contract services are year over year, and I get that. How much in this budget are we spending on one-time consulting services? What and who are they?
We'll have to, I mean, I don't know that we could rattle that
Yeah, that-
off.
Well,
No, you can get back to me on that, or all of it.
What, the question was, just to be clear, how much money is spent and
On
in the proposed budget for one-time
consulting services.
consulting services?
Yes.
Okay, we can get that.
Very good, thank you. On page 94, the town is already has transitioned to transfer tax on the sale of existing homes as opposed to new homes. Most of the data that we see monthly provided by Dawn, gives us that new home, existing home of around 80%, followed by new homes and then a small percentage on lot sales. But yet, Dawn, you just mentioned 67% was on existing homes.
Well, that's for the period, the beginning of this fiscal year, last May till January. That, you
Okay.
see it monthly?
Yes,
We give you that information monthly, but what we provided right now is from the beginning of the fiscal year we're in now until January.
okay, thank you. Page 105, next year, the street repair trust fund will be depleted and in the negative.
If we do everything.
Okay. So is the thought of pushing some of them off or delaying some of that or receiving grants or?
Actually, we're planning to do most of it. We pushed out some things already.
Okay. Page 114, page 123, business and insurance bonds. That comes up quite a bit for each almost department, for the police and for planning and zoning and whatnot. And that's just the insurance that we need to carry and the bonds that we need to carry on what we're doing.
One
114.
fourteen, it's our business insurance through. Well, not BFIT, but try.
And that's broken out by department? It seems to be.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
On
Like for the
page one-
police department vehicles,
Okay.
so they're be higher. They also have extra coverage of our insurance policy. It also includes our insurances for all the buildings, the parks, the vehicles.
Good, thank you.
And
for
then.
breaking- Yeah, I
for-
like that detail. On page
for the people.
114, you have consulting services at $75,000.
Yeah, a lot of that is, planning.
This is under us, the
Oh,
consulting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That has to do with the 69.5 for the two. For the two.
Oh, that's the two studies.
The two studies.
The two studies for the police department compensation and primarily that and the risk assessment
Mhm.
that
So
are
that-
being funded, recommended to be funded by unassigned fund balance.
No, yes. But that's part of those one-time charges that I talked to you about earlier, is that correct?
Those are the only one-time consulting that we have for this year.
And then here's some real quick ones. Page 114, holiday decor is going down by 20,000. Holiday decor management.
Yes, there's some things that we did that are done and we won't have to do again, and some changes that have been made, things like that.
Okay. Page 123, there's a 100% increase of consulting services by $40,000 broken up into planning support, consulting, and traffic analysis.
Yes, this year, in previous years, that amount has been part of our capital improvement plan. And then if something comes from the study, it actually becomes part of the project, but if it doesn't become a project, it has to be moved. So technically, that really shouldn't be part of the CIP or the capital improvement plan. So this year we've moved it to operating paid for it, or general fund paid for it. So I think putting it back in planning and zoning is the place where it should be.
Very good, thank you.
So you will not see a duplicate in the capital improvement plan. It's been removed from there.
Okay,
And that's
And-
why it increased.
okay, and just a few more. On Ocean View PD, FY 26 overtime is 305,000. But yet in FY 24 and 25, it was zero. We never projected overtime, or am I just overlooking that, or it wasn't included in this budget? And this past years, like, it was zero.
Where this?
What page are you on, Councilman?
129.
Overtime for PD in 24 was 140,000. In 25, it budgeted for 123,000, and we're budgeting for 149,000.
Okay.
It's
I'll look-
special duty officer, that's zero.
I'll look at that page again. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And again, there's that, business insurance bonds and all that stuff, and that's down 15,000, which is good. And throughout the budget, we made mention of costs, and some of the costs involve gas and diesel. It's brought us specifically. But yet, in two different departments, you've decreased the amount of budgeted dollars for gas and diesel. page 132 and page 139.
$139 is for DPW. If you recall, last year we budgeted, or for this year, we budgeted higher gas because we had an employee that had a take-home vehicle that was approved by council. We no
Okay.
longer have someone driving a couple hours a day. As far as police department, I mean, gas has come down some and we took it back to pretty much actuals. Last year, we increased it quite a bit in the FY25 budget. Thinking that it was gonna continue to rise.
Okay.
And it just hasn't gotten as high as, and that's really a cause to make, you know, who can forecast what gas prices are gonna be in a year.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, Dawn, you bring up a great point. Down here in Marathon, one day it was 20 cents less, 2 days later it was 30 cents more. Bingo.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
and my
But
last,
we should do more actual, what's
Yeah.
actually being, instead of there being what ifs. And that's where adding some unassigned in case it does hike up really high, we'll be able to cover that.
and my last comment, just a well done job on this. The budget last year's or the year before was 300 and some pages. This is down to 187. It's concise. It's just wonderful. And then the one concern I do have, and I'm sure the mayor and the other council people know this, the county tax is going to go up for most of our residents with the assessment, which is in the appeal process now. The Indian River School District referendum, when passed, is going to add an additional $239 per year. The town rate is going to go up by 2 cents, followed by, another reassessment in 2027. I think the town and under your guidance, Carol, has come with a very good and trim and slim budget. And this isn't a surprise. So I thank you for your time and answering this question.
Thank you.
Hey, Carol, can I just make a quick comment? I know there was a couple questions before too about the police overtime. I just want to clarify that a lot of those funds are grant funds. So, for example, I worked 4 hours of overtime this past Saturday. There was a grant from the Office of Highway Safety where they're reimbursing us. So I work, town pays us, but then we get reimbursed by the in that case, the federal government for that time. So it's some of that is pass through.
Yes.
Situation.
We do budget for overtime, but as Chief said, if they don't, a lot of the overtime is grant covered. So if they don't get the grant, they don't work the overtime.
Well, and again, thank you very much. And my reference was more of the one mistake I made. Overtime budgeted is going to go up a little bit in 2026 from the prior year, but you can budget it, then what it actually comes into is two different stories. So you do the best you can. So, but I thank you.
Income sources, you have the rental tax, I understand that, but then it says real estate rental agent license, and there's no income. What is
Real estate rental,
license?
what page are you on?
That's my problem. I'm trying to find where I saw that.
Okay.
So I just thought, is that a realtor that has to pay a fee?
There, a few years ago, and that's what I'm thinking that
That got stopped.
looking at, that got stopped.
Yeah.
And so now we no longer collect that because we're not
It
able to.
became a law that we
Oh,
couldn't charge
okay.
it anymore.
I think that's under here.
Yeah, because I've seen that, I thought, okay, why is there in there?
Yeah, and you wouldn't have seen like prior year where it was there. so-
Real estate sale rental agent license.
yeah.
Yes, that's no longer
We
an
should-
allowable.
We
fee.
actually probably should take it out.
And it will, but in FY24, we
It'll-
did,
It'll fall
it'll
off.
fall off. Mhm.
Any other questions? None, then I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And it's my pleasure now to move on to the next section to introduce from PFM, Leanne Long, who we worked with on our financial forecast.
Yes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here. As Karen introduced, I'm Ian Long. I'm a director of PFM Group Consulting, and PFM was engaged late last year, I think it was around Christmas, to develop two specific pieces of analyses for Ocean View. First is a financial condition assessment, essentially evaluating where the town has been in the past and where it is going in the future, absent any kind of corrective actions or any changes. That was the first piece of analysis.
Closer to the mic? Okay.
Sorry, I keep walking around. The second piece of analysis we were asked to do is, okay, based on that forecast, based on the financial condition assessment, what recommendations do you recommend us to do and change in the future, if any? So those were the two pieces of analysis we're engaged to do. My understanding, you have gotten part one of the analysis, and I'm trying to focus on the part two, the recommendations piece of that analysis today. But before I do that, allow me to do a little quick recap of that part one, because all of that assessment, that condition assessment is relevant for the future. So my presentation today is a recap of that diagnosis piece, a part one piece of that analysis, and then moving on to the step two, the options and recommendations based on our understanding of the town's financial condition. And then finally, the third piece, considerations and next steps in terms of like, what should the town be doing? And from that perspective, it's a little bit different from what Kara had just presented. You know, you were very focused on the FY26 budget, and that will be part of this recommendation. But it is a longer term view. We are providing recommendations not just for FY26, but for the next couple of years, understanding any kind of plan, any kind of financial plan is incremental, is iterative. You can't do it all in one day. So we are hoping to kind of bring you back out to the bigger picture, to the longer term perspective. So first of all, let me recap the diagnosis piece, the historical financial picture. So when I talk about general fund, and I know you know this, but forgive me for recapping just to make sure we're all on the same page. When the town talks about general fund, it includes the operating budget, which is a recurring expenditure of police department, everyday spending, and the capital budget. That those two pieces together makes up the full general fund. If I just look at the operating budget piece of the general fund, the town has consistently had positive net operating results over the last 5 years. However, when I move to the capital side of the budget, and those are the bar graphs here, the increase in capital spending over the last couple of years result in that overall general fund surplus / deficit chart. So if you just look at the financial statements, you see the town drawing down from the fund balance, but that is not because the town was not balanced from an operating perspective. It was simply because your general fund includes both the operating and capital. So when your capital spending increase, that results in the expenditure exceeding the revenues. And that's why it shows up in the red. So if anyone was just reading the financial statements, they might think, oh no, the town was having deficit. That's actually not entirely true because it was driven by capital spending. And our evaluation that what you did was reasonable and was aligned with best practices. Your trust fund, your restricted capital trust funds was dedicated for capital purposes. And so obviously when you have capital needs, you draw from that fund. So that in itself is a reasonable, it's a best practice of operation over there. And I just want to be clear, when you see the red, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, using the historical information, we project forward for 5 years, and that's part of the engagement, is to develop a 5-year financial forecast for the town. And what we assumed is for FY 26, consistent with the FY 26 budget, assume a 2-cent increase in the real estate tax rate and an increase in the gross receipts tax from 5 to 6%. I'll just note here that there will be slight variance with the 26 budget because we were, again, engaged in late last year. The projection was done based on the FY 25 budget, so slight variance is expected. But the story is very consistent. You know, we see the FY 26 budget being balanced. Even here, it shows a little bit of a positive result here. But you start seeing red numbers beginning in FY 2027. Much of that is driven by the increased capital spending, which is the light blue bar at the bottom. As you see kind of transfer tax leveling and slightly declining, and as you see the capital spending growing, you see the brown bar there, which is a trust fund balance dropping over time. And Councilman just asked, you know, is the trust fund going to be depleted by FY 2027? And the answer is yes, if the town you know, assumes a kind of over $3 million in capital spending going forward. So that is the reason for those red numbers in the box here, is in part driven by the capital spending, but that is not the only part of the story. You know, if we kind of step back and look at the financial forecast itself, you know, we do see some kind of operating deficit there. And that's not surprising necessarily, not to me at least. Most local governments, you know, for the town is approaching build out, your real estate tax assessments growth has been slowing down, right? You see your transfer tax starting to decline and leveling out. If you have a slowing revenue growth, and when that is being coupled with rising expenditure, right? Inflationary growth for supplies and non-personnel costs, you know, salary increases, benefit increases. When you couple a relatively flat revenue trend with a growing expenditure trend, you know, obviously mathematically, you're going to see that deficit going forward. So again, the first point here is that, you know, just like a lot of other municipalities, Ocean View is not exempt from that kind of pressure, that kind of spending growth exceeding revenue growth. We talk about capital spending and how that is going to drive the trust funds balance. But even beyond those two things, you know, in the FY 26 budget, we talked about the compensation studies, and that is kind of the pressures is lurking in the corner a little bit and saying, you know, part of your compensation is to have a competitive compensation package to recruit and retain your talent. So the question is, what do you need to do on the compensation front in order to achieve that goal? So those kind of pressures are lurking in the corner. And so those kind of pressures, when you combine them together, what we see in the 5-year financial forecast is that your unassigned fund balance, your fund balance is going to start dropping below the current 4 to 6 months, you know, range that which is your goal. You start seeing the fund balance dropping below those thresholds, and all of that is a known element as of today. We talked a little about gas prices being unknown. You know, as of today, the economy is still a very unknown piece. You know, I think last year we're all fearing that there'll be a hard landing. We're grateful that there's not a hard landing, but rather a soft landing, and there was no economic downturn. But right now, for instance, you know, with the inflationary forecast, we're really not sure what the economy would do. And that would be the element of the unknown. And that in itself would drive some kind of, you know, adverse revenue impact on your consumer-driven revenues, for instance. So again, what we see here is, you know, historically, you had positive net operating results. Going forward, you have some pressures that are common to most local government, some pressures that are specific to you, like the compensation piece, right? Some capital spending is very common regarding like the need to maintain existing assets. And you also have the economy kind of lurking in the corner again, saying, you know, what is that going to do to your financial forecast? In summary, what that means is that it will just be harder to maintain your projects and service levels absent any kind of corrective changes, or, you know, you just can't kind of keep driving and take your hands off the steering wheel. You kind of have to make some adjustments as you move forward. That was our evaluation. So what kind of adjustments should you make? And let me be clear here. You know, our evaluation is that the town is still in very good financial footing. But we do think some adjustments will be beneficial. We want to make sure that those adjustments aren't just, you know, raising taxes, reducing expenditures. We want to make sure those adjustments are thoughtful and that those adjustments are well-rounded based on the risks that we identify through the financial forecasts. So 3 main strategies here. One is around policies and primarily the reserve policies. Number two is capital funding, given that the capital spending is really what drives your trust funds to be potentially depleted by FY 2027, developing some kind of alternatives to your capital spending. And then finally, workforce strategy. And the reason workforce strategy is in there is just like any local governments, you're labor intensive, you're a local government, right? You deliver police services, public work services. You really cannot have a meaningful financial plan unless you talk a little bit at least about the workforce spending piece of it. So those are the three main strategies I want to go through as part of this overall plan in terms of the adjustments that we think will benefit the town based on the financial forecast that we developed. So let me first talk about the policy guardrails and reserve policy. This is what you currently have. Right now, the town has a 20% emergency reserve policy, and that is in the budget document as a policy. It has a replenishment policy. It tells us that, in order to use that, you need to either be in a public emergency, or there's a natural disaster, or if your transfer tax reduces. Those are the parameters for using that emergency reserve trust, and that's in this blue bar here. The second main reserve is the unassigned fund balance. That's a red bar up there. The unassigned fund balance is your goal is GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, recommends at minimum 2 months, and your goal is to have 4 to 6 months, which is your financial advisor will tell you that's precisely what the credit rating agencies want to hear. They want to hear that you're not just at the minimum, but you have a range and it's above that. And of course, if it's a state government, maybe like the threshold, the amount can be lower because the budget is that much bigger. But for a smaller budget, it is good to be higher because percentage and dollar amount, they're different. So you want to make sure it translates to a meaningful dollar amount. But the unassigned fund balance it is a policy goal. It is not an actual policy in itself right now. So that's what you have. And when I look at these two reserves, I view these as, an informal term, a do not touch reserve. Yes, you can touch it for one-time purposes. Yes, if there was a snow event, you touch it. But generally speaking, you tend to not go into it very often, right? These are again, informally, I'm calling them do not touch reserves. In addition to those two reserves, which we just talked about, the town has other reserves, and those are what I'm calling the working reserves, the touch reserves, right? The two capital trust funds, those are working reserves that says that you put money in, you put the transfer tax money in, you pull money out to pay for capital projects. Those are working reserve. You are expected to go into it very often, every single year, to replenish it and then keep drawing from it. Same thing with the Emergency Service Enhancement Trust Fund, where you use it to pay for your volunteer fire department. So those are your working trust funds. And these are kind of your generally don't touch funds. So that's what you have today. Before I talk about what we recommend the town to do, let me step back a little bit just to talk about, philosophically, why are reserves necessary? What is the point of it? When it comes to revenue projection, it's really hard to project precisely exactly what your revenues would be. And so on an annual basis, some kind of use of reserves is necessary, which you were like, okay, well, you said it's necessary, and yet you say do not touch. How does that link together, right? Some kind of reserves is necessary because you can't project perfectly. And that's why a lot of places have more than one reserves. It's because of this kind of, imprecision with revenue forecast that makes the use of reserves necessary. I've been saying to my clients, to local governments for the last year, right now is a really good time to look at your reserve and make sure it is up to standard. Why is that? If you recall from the post-pandemic years, there was an influx of federal funding. Now, not only is the federal dollars drying up, there's a significant amount of economic uncertainty like I just talked about. So before we right now we're at this pivotal point in terms of, okay, what's going to happen next now? Before we get to that point, now is just a really good time to take a look at your reserve and say, is it where I want it to be? And do I have the reserves that I want to have? It's just, again, because of the uncertainty that is upcoming. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy with so much of the turmoil going around the world. Yes, when it comes to the economy, it filters through the national economy to your consumer base. And that's why it's important to look at your reserves at this point in time. There's an opportunity cost reserves, and I acknowledge that. Every dollar that you save, that you put in the bank account, is a dollar that you cannot spend. And so there's an opportunity cost when it comes to reserves. And that's why we don't recommend, just put all your money in reserve because, doomsday is gonna come. There's a balance here. And when it comes to reserve, it's important to say, okay, what are the risks I'm trying to mitigate? What is the point of it? I mean, from a personal finance, perspective, it's good to have reserve for emergency. If I want to buy a car, if I want to buy a house, right? I set up different kind of savings account just to make sure that I can hit my financial goals. Similarly, for local governments, you want to think about what are the goals I'm achieving, what are the risks I'm mitigating, and set up the reserves accordingly, precisely because of the opportunity cost I just referenced. So Newcastle County is a case study, AAA credit rating. They have a couple of reserves. They have a budget reserve, so what they call a rainy day fund, 20%. They have a tax stabilization reserve to stabilize tax rates. And they also have a number of other reserves, one of them being in a reassessment reserve, just because, reassessment costs money. And you can begin to see how, they stacked up these different kinds of reserves for different purposes. And so that's kind of the philosophical thinking here for the town of Ocean View. So let me step back. Okay, what are the risks we are trying to mitigate? What are your risks here? We talked a little bit about that during the 5-year financial forecast. You have limited revenue options. Because of state laws, you can only levy certain taxes, and you typically just, typically go back to the property tax and raise those taxes because your revenue options are limited. You're approaching full build out, which means that your assessment growth has been slowing down. And as you can already see, your transfer tax has been leveling out as well. Those are your risks on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, not uncommon to other peers of yours, where you have service demands, where you have to keep compensation competitive, where you have that revenue growth lagging expenditure growth. So those are the risks on the expenditure side. Given these risks, what we recommend is to, number one, formalize a reserve policy. So like I said, the 20% emergency reserve policy is a policy. I can find it in the budget document. There are clear replenishment goals and policy related to that. The first recommendation is to codify your unassigned fund balance. So earlier I said you have the second reserve, the red numbers, the unassigned fund balance, but that in itself is not a policy yet. So provide the policy guardrails and actually codify that particular unassigned fund balance policy first. That's the first recommendation. The second recommendation is to develop a tax rate stabilization reserve. And, going back to my earlier language, right, the emergency reserve and the unassigned fund balance is generally a quote unquote did not touch reserve. But the goal of this particular reserve is that you touch it. You can touch it. It creates the ability for you to go into it to stabilize your tax rate, but also for any kind of imprecise revenue forecast, which happens to anyone. You can touch this reserve because that will create that additional buffer that you will need given the risks and the pressures that we have talked about. At the same time, it is important to not just go into the reserve all the time and not replenish it. Otherwise, you're just using one-time revenues to pay for ongoing expenditures. And so the recommendation here is to set up that reserve that you can touch, that you intend to touch on an ongoing basis, but that you have a replenishment policy to kind of keep backfilling it so that you not run out of that reserves. The goal here is that, I wouldn't be surprised if in a given year, because of, compensation adjustments, something that requires you to have a large real estate tax rate increase. Obviously, that's undesirable for many reasons. And this particular stabilization reserve, the goal is to smooth that rate increase. Instead of having a big increase in 1 year, you kind of smooth it out over a couple of years, or phase it in other words, over a couple of years, so that you can still meet your service demands, keep your compensation competitive, make sure that you don't use one-time revenues to pay for ongoing expenditures. And yet at the same time, you have that kind of buffer here to allow you to face in that kind of tax increase that you would need. So you may ask, well, that's a great idea, but how do I do that? And how do I fund it? Well, good thing you asked, and you are just gonna be finalizing the water infrastructure sale soon in April. So the idea here is, I think that that sale is going to generate at least $1 million. If that's true, dedicate a portion of that to seed fund that tax rate stabilization fund. Again, the idea is if you dip into that fund, that you replenish it over a couple of years. That way you face in any kind of large increase that you might need in the next 5 years. To complement that particular tax rate stabilization reserve, another recommendation is to establish a real estate tax policy. And it's just a simple policy that says, you would increase your real estate tax rate based on inflationary growth. And then nearby Milton actually just did that not too long ago. The reason is this, earlier I talked about that pressure of oftentimes revenue growth lags expenditure growth just a little bit. And when that happens mathematically, you would have a deficit. This kind of policy ensures that you're just growing your real estate tax by just that little bit to make sure you are catching up with the growth of your expenditures. And we think that would be a good complement to the tax rate stabilization fund. And that would be, these two policies will serve different purposes. This policy in particular would make sure that you're growing your revenue and not eroding your base. The other tax rate stabilization fund is going to help minimize the impact on the taxpayer. So you're kind of working on both ends to make sure that you're growing your revenues and yet that your taxpayers are not, having that significant increase on their tax bill so much. So really, that's the overall vision for the reserve policy. I don't think it's a huge change. I'm hoping that this is more like a tweak, like the steering wheel tweak, where you already have the emergency reserve policy. We're asking that you formalize an unassigned fund balance policy, and you establish this new tax rate stabilization policy, and to complement that, use your real estate tax policy to make sure that you're growing your base just a little bit every year. And then in an ideal world, all these policies will work in conjunction with each other to make sure that your revenue-based growth is robust enough to support your expenditure growth. Now, of course, you still have your trust funds on the side, and those would still be your working fund balances, your working reserves. But these three policies together, including plus the real estate tax policy, in all conjunction together will help your revenue base grow over time. So that's the first major strategy in terms of okay, given these risks and these red numbers, what do we do about it? Let me move into the second main strategy, which is capital. And the chart here, let me kind of go through the colors one by one. Transfer tax, as you know, has grown significantly and kind of peaked in the FY20, FY21 years, and since then has been declining. That's a dark blue bar. If you turn your attention to the light blue bar, that's the capital spending. And over the years, your capital spending has, increased, but you can see that your capital spending has been lower than the brown bar, than the trust fund balance every single year. However, you can see in the last year, in FY 2024, that's when it begins to change. Your capital spending started exceeding the trust fund balance for the first time. And you can see, if you imagine this, just keep going, if you drag it forward, you can see why your trust fund balance is going to be depleted at some point. Right now, we're forecasting FY 2027, but you can see why this trend, if you just keep dragging forward, that will result in the trust fund balance being depleted. That's why we feel like there could be another strategy just to make sure that you have sufficient funding for capital investments. In the near term, I actually think there's not significant difference that you have to do with status quo. You have been thoughtful about having a reserve study. You have been thoughtful about making sure that your existing infrastructure is aligned with your life cycle replacement schedules. And what we're seeing is in the near term, with the water distribution system reserves coming, make sure that you invest those reserves wisely. Make sure that you invest those reserves in things that actually improves the life cycle replacement schedule. Make sure that it actually reduces your recurring operating costs by investing in it. So in the near term, all we're saying is make sure you invest those funds wisely, those one-time proceeds wisely. In the longer term, however, especially if you keep dragging this chart on going for many, many years, in the long term, you want to start thinking about debt funding a portion of your CIP. And again, this is not immediately. I don't see you needing to do it right away, but it is something that is good to start thinking about and good to start drawing lines around what that means for you. When it comes to capital investments, you have been paying it with your transfer taxes. Many places generally for a big construction of a building, they would use debt financing, right, to do that. Part of that is to spread the cost over many years. But part of that is to ensure generational equity, right? If you use cash to fund a building today, you're asking current taxpayers to pay for all of that. When 10 years from now, those taxpayers are still enjoying that infrastructure. If you spread that payment over a long time, you're ensuring that future taxpayers also pay for kind of their enjoyment of the infrastructure. That essentially explains the equity perspective of debt financing. Of course, there's an interest cost to it, and that there's pros and cons here. But I think as you again drag that graph, going forward, you'll find that you might benefit from debt financing a portion of your CIP. And generally speaking, you want to draw kind of bright lines around what you want to debt fund. Not everything should be debt funded. Vehicles should not be debt funded because the useful lives are so short. It doesn't make sense to use debt financing to finance vehicles. But for big projects that have long useful lives, that can be a good strategy. That can help you make sure your trust fund balance are not depleted. It helps you stretch that payment over a long time. It helps ensure that equity perspective I just talked about. And so right now, what I think you can do is draw some bright lines around, okay, what do I want to debt finance when the time comes? You probably are setting some kind of threshold in terms of only, I'm making this up, only projects that, create useful lives of more than 5 years, or only projects that exceed, I don't know, X million dollars. But some kind of policy or some kind of, bright line around what you would like to debt finance in the future when the time comes is good homework to do as of today. So that's essentially is the capital strategy. The last strategy is the workforce strategy, and we talked a little bit about that even in the FY26 budget context. The town has been able to provide wage adjustments over the years, to catch up with inflationary growth, and all of that is important for your labor, for recruitment and for retention, to make sure that your compensation package is competitive. But as Carol suggested earlier, there may be some pressures in your immediate surrounding community that makes you have to perhaps increase these rates, these percentages a little higher. PFM does a lot of workforce consulting, including in a collective bargaining setting. When we see these kind of pressures from your neighbors, the advice we give is own your own story. Instead of being reactive to what everyone else is doing, it's important to step back and say, okay, what am I offering here? What is my current package? What is my strength and weaknesses in terms of my package? What benefits do I offer? There's just a lot more nuance to compensation generally than just starting pay. And so our recommendation here is, take control of your own story. Let's take a look at what you offer and identify where you're strong and where you're weak in terms of your compensation package, and then develop a plan from then on. Again, some adjustments is probably likely necessary, but before you jump and make those adjustments, what we're just recommending is to step back, because compensation, like I said, is a big part of your town's budget, and any changes would have a lot of impact on your overall expenditure. When we talk about workforce, oftentimes the focus is on compensation, but that's really only 50% of the total workforce cost. The formula for workforce cost is simply compensation, including benefits, multiplied by the people that you have. And the people part is the other half of that workforce. Talking about headcount is usually a difficult thing. It's oftentimes very emotional when it comes to headcount. And oftentimes, not saying it's you, but oftentimes, again, amongst my clients, when it comes to headcount, it's like, well, someone is really busy, we need to add more people here. Or, well, that department is not so busy, they're okay, right? What we're saying is those are fair approaches, especially if you kind of know the weeds of the department operations. But sometimes it is helpful to kind of step back and say, what is the workload? What is our service quality? What is our turnaround time? Using those kind of more quantitative measures to figure out what headcount you should have. Just one, example, if you have a permit department, right? Lots of permits are coming in, the workload is overwhelming. The immediate answer may be we need more people. But another answer could be, well, what is the current required turnaround time? How long are they getting these permits approved? Are they actually still meeting that benchmark? Okay, they're not because their workload is so overwhelming. What is the actual current turnaround time? And are we okay with that? Is the community okay with that? And maybe the answer is no, and then you add more headcount, but that approach of tying, headcount to workload, to service quality, to efficiency, that approach just makes taxpayers understand, okay, I'm paying for that extra person because I can get my permit approved in time. Again, it's an overly simplistic example, but that's what we're talking about when we're saying, sometimes, using these a little bit more quantitative measures to top a headcount can be helpful, especially because, resources are limited. We would all love to have more, but resources are limited. And sometimes you do have to go through those exercises in order to make sure that you're allocating your resources to the places that have the most return on investments. So just to summarize a little bit, in terms of next steps, we're recommending, develop some policy guardrails for your reserve policy. We're recommending stepping back and taking a look at your compensation package. We're recommending, in the near term, keep doing what you're doing with the capital investments, but start drawing some bright lines around what you would like to debt finance in the future. And I would be lying if I don't talk about tax rate adjustments. I do think tax rate adjustments will still be necessary in the long term, but that's exactly why we propose the tax rate stabilization fund, is that because that is necessary, but also because ultimately it's the property owners who receive the burden. That kind of policy, that kind of tax rate stabilization reserve will help some of that in terms of reducing the burden on your taxpayers in any given year. This table is essentially a next step. This is your to-do list. Going from, you're focused on the FY26 budget rightfully right now. But once you get the FY26 budget done, these are the kind of next steps to work on. Make sure you start putting away some of the reserve, the water sale money into a tax rate stabilization reserve. Start doing some of the compensation analysis. Start thinking about capital strategy. These are kind of your next step action items. And again, just to recap, and this is my last slide here, our evaluation is that you are in good financial footing. You have a sound reserve. Your credit rating agency says so. You have a sound reserve. You're thinking about this proactively. You called us and asked us to develop this plan proactively. You are in good financial footing. And all we're saying is you do have some challenges. The financial forecast does indicate some of these challenges. Some of them are driven by you, the town where it is in terms of how mature it is and building out. Some of that is driven by your neighbors. Your neighbors are the ones who start raising some of the compensation. So not, because of the forces, the pressures, and the risks you are facing, what we're saying is, if you can just make some adjustments to your steering wheel, like just a little bit, we really do think that these three main strategies, the policies, the capital strategy, and the workforce strategy, can truly create this kind of long-term financial sustainability that you're looking at, that is not just about balancing the budget, that is not just making sure that you end the year with black numbers, but that you can achieve some of the things that you just talked about, right? The parks, investing in the people, beautification, all of those things are driven by these numbers. The reason I got into this, financial consultant business is because, money is not everything, but it's certainly, you can't do a whole lot without money. So hopefully all of these strategies will help you achieve some of these goals. And again, I do think some tweak to your current approach will be enough to ensure that you're in good financial footing, that you are still able to, actually invest in the places you want to invest. I think that concludes my presentation, but I know.
Thank you
Mr.
very
Mayor.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great
go
job.
ahead. Thank
Great
you.
job.
Yeah.
I have a number of questions,
Please do.
and I'm sure other people do as well. In your analysis here, you were recommending a 3.5 cent real estate tax for the stabilization fund replenishment. Is that in addition to the 1% incremental increase we want to have as well?
Correct. And just to be clear, that wasn't like what $500,000 would equate to. The $500,000 in seed money would equate to very approximately 3.5 cents. That was a way we say, you know, is $500,000 a seed money for the tax rate stabilization fund? Is that the right number? That was the approach there, not so
Okay.
much a rate increase. Right?
Okay, so you're, you're talking about the 3.5 cent coming out of the tax stabilization fund, not as an additional tax.
Correct, yes, that's
Okay.
just seed money.
That's good.
But maybe not all at the same time.
You can phase it into, yeah.
Okay. And then you talked about the CPI under the capital funding. The CPI measure as an annual tax increase.
Mm. Yep.
At 3% or above.
This one, right?
Yeah. So you're talking about, in addition, a 3% tax increase?
So I'm talking about for FY 27 and beyond, to increase the real estate tax rate based on the CPI. And the CPI, as you know, sure, the post-COVID years have been, you know, all over the place, but even before then, it was much less than that. It was like 1 to 2% prior to that. This is simply to make sure that you're growing your revenues at the same rate of your expenditures.
But that seems rather high. I mean, we are trying to keep the tax rate down at 2% or less, or 2 cents or less. Moving it to the CPI of 3%. Every year. Seems to be somewhat onerous.
So right now, what is 1 cent in terms of percentage? I don't have
It's-
my.
2 cents is 8%.
So 1 cent is
8%.
So 1 cent will be like 4%. So we're saying the percentage is not a cent percentage.
It's
I
not
think.
tax rate, it's the value of. I'm trying to figure the right way to say it.
So let's say CPI goes up by 2% next year, which is what the Federal Reserve is targeting.
Mhm.
That would be 0.5 cents. Translate to
That would be what?
0.5 cent increase per $100 in the cents values.
Yeah, 2% CPI is reasonable. 3% or CPI. I think is too high.
That's about 1 cent.
Yeah.
A little less than 1 cent.
3% was less than 1 cent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
keep-
sorry.
And
That's
then
why
keep in
1
mind-
cent's not
Right.
percentages.
Yeah, keep in mind if we are successful and we create tax rate stabilization. And we get to FY 27 and we're considering following the CPI. All of that can be considered together.
Right.
So some money could be coming from that and then
Right.
there is whatever.
Right.
Whatever we decide our tax rate stabilization fund's gonna look like and how we're gonna administer it.
Mhm.
We wanna put in the guardrails so that we have rules. Which have served us well with our trust funds.
Right.
So it could be a mix of things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had recommended that that on the water sale, we put 500,000 into this tax stabilization fund.
Correct.
You did not talk about strategic investments. So were you thinking the other $500,000
Yeah.
would go into strategic investments?
Correct, and that would be this first bullet point right here. The other $500,000, I would envision you to put it into some kind of strategic investments
Like what?
For capital.
for capital.
No, I mean, what would be the investments that you would, what type of investments are
Sure.
you thinking about?
So I would not like, I'll let, your staff, determine what type of investment will be most, have the most highest in terms of return on investment. What I do advise against, I would say, is, use all of that money to build new things and expand your infrastructure that you have to maintain. The goal is to use those additional, the $500,000 to your existing infrastructure, reduce your ongoing maintenance needs for those, right? That's how you generate a return on investments. So again, exactly where, obviously I will defer to your staff, but I would recommend against kind of building new things.
Yeah, I think we're already doing some of that already, right?
Yeah,
Being, would you say that, and you may not know, we may need to think about it more, but if we had the other 500,000, would strategically placing it into some of our existing trusts make sense?
I think so, especially since you already have a capital process in place. Putting in the trust and let your capital process run through it. You're not recreating another process. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. And I do like your idea about a cost benefit approach to staffing. I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things about capital funding or capital projects, I thought, according to Ken, over the next few years, he didn't see that those capital projects would be as much as they have been up till now. So the estimates for 27, 28 should be lower on the chart than what you have. Yes or no? Why?
Yeah, but we were able to push some things out based on everything that we have accomplished. The goal will be to not get behind. So we may not be doing as many things as robustly as we have been. When we get to FY 27 and see what, you know, the reality is. But then we're also, when we're thinking about capital projects and things, you're also thinking about the cost, that it's not going down. So you'll remember a couple years back, we tapped into our unassigned fund balance because we had such good bids so that we could do some projects while it was, you know, really easy to do so at that cost. So we're always going to have the conversation about, you know, how much can we do? And that also will play back into, you know, how much can the staff handle? How much can they oversee? And which goes into staff head count.
Right.
And things like that. So none of this is a fix where we just say, hey, we're on a gravy train now, we don't pay attention. Every year, we're still gonna have conversations, but if we put some more things in place, like what we had, like was done years ago for the trust fund, we're gonna have guardrails for all of us that help us navigate until we get to the point where we're kind of running at our normal. And maybe we'll be fortunate enough to find some other revenue streams, but they're not, there's not a lot out there.
Okay, so my last question has to do with long-term debt.
Okay.
Financed. So I had a hard time getting my head around that because I did some figuring. And I took, for an example, to pay off a loan of $2 million over 10 years. And I know you said they're longer, it's 20 or 30 years to do this, but just as an example, and assuming a moderate interest rate of 5%, that you would need to take monthly payments of $21,892 per month to pay off that debt, which is the equivalent of $2.6 million over 10 years. Now, if you made that 20 years, you know, that's $1.7 million in interest. That debt is very expensive. Why would you recommend that when that would seem to put us more in debt than helping us stay out of debt?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's one of the downsides of debt financing. You incur interest costs. Number one, you'll be, you know, because your local government, you will be. I'm not a financial advisor. Jamie will have to be here to talk about this. But you would be, you know, entitled to the tax exempt interest rates, which will be generally lower. Number one. Number two is, you know, that's why I say you don't need to explore it today. Especially with your water distribution system sale coming up, I really don't see you needing to explore that. However, you know, if you come to a point where there are capital projects that are very expensive, if you would be at crossroads. You would have to either decide, okay, do I want to issue debt to fund that because I don't have the cash to do that? Or even if I had the cash, right, I have other things I need to pay for, right? You'd be at crossroad whether do I issue debt to fund it or do I not do it? That will be the crossroads that you will be at that point in time. And the not doing it can often cost way more than the interest cost because of deferred maintenance. And so if you have the cash to do it today, I'm not saying you should do debt financing. I'm just saying in the long term, when you come to that road of like, okay, I don't have enough money to cash fund it, and I have way too many priorities. I'm advising against not doing it. I would say the interest cost will still be cheaper, quote unquote, than the deferred maintenance of which.
I can kind of share like a thought process that I have is, so our cash is going to be very crucial. We're gonna be deciding what are we using it on. We already know our people are gonna be our big expense, it's always gonna be that way. We have a beautiful park here, we enjoy it, we maintain it. But we're going to have to replace all of the equipment. We should go to where it's fully accessible, not like it's not right now. So that's an expense that's going to be quite expensive. I've been trying to save money and, you know, for the 5 years, and I just can't hit the amount of money that we're gonna need when we wanna do that. And when we wanna do it, we wanna do it quick, because the playground's gonna be closed and everybody enjoys it, and you're gonna wanna do it in a certain period of time. And then we get back to the whole, generational equity, where it's gonna last 30 years. We don't wanna use all our cash right now, where the people who are here right now enjoying it are paying the whole full fare. Where, like, in my mind, that's a prime example for us, Ocean View, of what we may wanna take tax exempt debt for. To get the money, do it right, do it quick, pay it off over years, so that people for 30 years who are living here and enjoying our playground are helping to pay for it. That's like the best example I can tell you. I think there's also probably some opportunities for street in the future. We've been keeping up with it, but it's not gonna get cheaper. You know how much it costs. We need to maintain our infrastructure, which we've done up until now, and we'll continue. But then you also, Deanne, you said something that made me think about it. What are the other consequences that cost more? What if we let our playground fail, and little by little, that playground equipment comes down, and that doesn't get replaced, and another one, and we don't trim the trees, and we don't improve the surfaces? Then the expenses, that what kind of community we are? Are we the community that's going to allow those things to falter, which a lot do? So we're gonna, you know, it's always gonna have to be thought very well through, but I think there are opportunities that'll help us be able to use our cash where we know we have to use it.
Yeah.
And then some of these longer term life things, and I'm not prepared to say money value or years, but you know, probably no less than 10-year life.
Yep.
If I were guessing. But we are gonna have those big expenses coming up.
Well, you know, when we borrowed money for the water utility, it was offset by collections. We're not really having the future taxpayers pay more than what they're paying now, because we have a limited tax base. After these two communities are finished building out, that's it. Except for resales and maybe a little house here and there. So I don't see that as future taxpayers really helping out, because they're just replacing taxpayers.
Yeah, but there's the equity component. If you believe that I buy the house 10 years from now and I'm paying taxes and I'm bringing my children to the playground. Whereas year one, when the playground was, you know, the people there for the 10 years before I got here were helping to pay that debt. Because that's going, our debt will always be part of our budget, you know, what we're funding. We
Well,
have to have the ability to pay. Ability to pay needs to be part of every decision we make. Compensation, headcount. You everything. So we have to, what is the limit that our property owners can take as far as increases in tax rate? They're really our main place to go. And how competitive are we? What is our neighboring towns, what are they having to do with their tax rate? I mean, everybody's gonna be facing this one way or another. So that's why all these things together right now I think are timely. I think it's, when I leave here, working here, I'm gonna still live in Ocean View, hopefully, and I wanna make sure that we're prepared to be able to function in the years ahead, like as well as we have, as well as the town has.
Yeah, Dawn, you have a question?
Isn't it also timing of the market? Like, it's pretty simple. The market was to be phenomenal in a year. You should strike while the iron's hot. And that should be reacted in the next budget accordingly, correct? And
Yeah.
just like if the market is on a very inconsistent, not sure where we're going type of thing.
Right.
It's foolish to make a big commitment to a loan, even if it's tax-free and all this, cheaper money.
Yeah.
Don't you think, there was a time a few years ago when money was quite cheap. The mortgage
Yeah.
money was quite cheap, everything was quite cheap.
Yeah.
To me, that's when, and it'll cycle, everything's cyclical.
Yeah.
Whether it's 5 years, 7 years, tomorrow. That's the only thing that I'm concerned with, taking
Right.
too much debt. And not realizing what could happen a few years from now.
Can I add to this? We're talking about debt for capital projects. We're talking about debt that would normally be paid from our capital reserve trust fund or our street repair trust fund. So instead of paying cash upfront out of those trust funds, which they cannot absorb the projects, we would be paying the debt bills from those trust funds, not from property taxes. So that it would be being reimbursed through the sales of through the community, through transfer taxes, which, to have a community that people want to live in, we need to invest in our infrastructure. So when we're talking about debt, we're not talking about debt for, hopefully not by property taxes.
Right.
That would be paid through the trust funds.
Okay.
And I mean, you're right, the interest rates change all the time, refunding always happens if the interest rate is lower, you can always, I mean, it's similar to a house mortgage, right? Like, if you can always refinance and stuff like that. And if someone is able to pay their house with cash and they have plenty, I'm sure they would pay the house with cash. It's exactly the same personal finance kind of thinking here too.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Steve?
Just two quick comments. I was glad to see when you were talking about comparing compensations and things that other towns do, for us to take a step back, look at ourselves. I've said that many times. It does matter what Bethany Beach does, but it matters more what we do and look introspectively. So I appreciate that. And Mr. Mayor, some of your other questions on debt financing, she just answered for me, and Dawn did as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. No other questions. I want to thank you very much for coming here. It was very informational,
Thank you very much.
educational as well.
Yeah,
Pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
Thank
very
you.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very nice. Great presentation.
Right, moving on to review and discussion of the fiscal year 26 general fund and water fund operating budget and 5-year capital improvement program.
I think you just did that.
Did we?
In the
Yeah.
two, yeah,
Okay. Then
unless you have some more questions.
I don't think we do,
Yeah.
but do we have anyone in the public?
No comments.
No comments. Okay, so there's no citizen privilege. So it's now our duty to provide directions to the town manager regarding the budget as proposed. Are there any changes or questions or comments in terms of what has been presented?
We
Right.
have the questions, Councilman Cobb, that we still know we owe you. So we'll get that back to you shortly.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Okay, and I don't have any changes that should be made to the budget. Does anybody else have any?
No, I'm good with the budget as it
So
stands.
nothing, we don't need to incorporate anything.
Not yet,
Right.
no. So the idea would be that, we would get this budget passed, next month likely. And, however we end up, and that after we do that, the dust settles, Dawn and I would start working on, how would we implement anything? We would bring all that back to you. And then if the budget is approved with the two studies, they will be also very, helpful. For the next budget year, which, comes around really quickly. I just, in reference to the compensation, you all know what's going on with police salaries and things. You've heard about it. We've talked about it. And we just, it's almost every week. There's one or two, and it's like starting salary. It's like, it's unlike ever in my career doing this, where we're constantly feeling like we're behind and we just thought we got caught up. So that's why I'm so interested and for the benefit of our officers who just want to know, well, where am I going to be 5 years from now? What am I going to be taking home? What is, what's it look like if I stay here in Ocean View compared to other places they can go? So that's why that study is really important. And then the look at whether or not we put a pay scale into place, which provides that, which there's some interest in us doing that. So it's just it. I'm sure the chief is frustrated every day. I'm frustrated every day, or every week, I should say, with like, oh my gosh. But that's starting salary is only one little piece. And I know we do well on a lot of things, but this study will let us know where we're falling short. And then we'll have to say, well, do we have the ability to correct that? Or don't we? And it'll be fair and square and everybody will know. What we can and can't do.
We're not gonna be able to compete with everybody. We're gonna have to determine what we can offer, as you said, to the applicants, not just money. There has to be other things involved. So,
Culture is a very important thing that I've learned from one of my children. Believe it or not, people value the culture of where they work just as much as compensation. Now, a lot of people will say the opposite, but I think as an example, this town is a much different culture than some of the residing towns. It's just a general statement. And I think that's definitely, to Jay's point, something we need to take a look at. Because we just cannot just keep climbing up the labor ladder. But we have a police chief that's long-term, that trains and develops. I don't see that everywhere. The reason why they want what they want is because they're well-trained. So many municipalities do not train the same way, and I'm sure the chief can acknowledge that. So that's just part of the conversation as we move forward, because it's going to be some kind of a breaking point where we have to make a stand on where we can offer.
Any other comments?
Just, right now, I think I understand that you don't want us to make any changes. It's not that this is not your last chance. I don't want you to, think if you have a thought after this, that it's not your last chance, but, just getting a feel that right now, the thought is that we don't need to make any changes at this point.
Right.
I wanted to share that, there was a newspaper article, in the local paper that, said that you already approved the budget. Of course, that was corrected in a online version. And, I received 2 calls, okay, where I was able to talk to the people and explain, that that's not the case. Oh, by the way, come today if you want to know more, and all that. So, I don't know what the appetite is. I know that people are concerned about the county reassessment. There's some confusion about our 2 cent being applied to the county's assessment, and we were able to, again, for this one person, talk through that. But you know, I don't know if you've gotten any feedback, but we have not gotten very much feedback. And I think our past years, if you think about keeping the tax rate the same for 3 years and having given back 3 cents the year before that, I think maybe people are understanding that, now's the time, and we said we were gonna try to do incremental, and that's what we're doing. That, it's necessary at this point.
Well, I think, over the last 4 years, what we've done has indicated to people that we really care about the town and not trying to gouge them with increased taxes. So, and I haven't heard anything from anyone, about this budget at all.
I've heard
Okay.
one comment, and it's very glowing and positive as far as the budget. And again, I thank Carol, your staff, and the mayor in your direction, and the council members for being good stewards of the taxpayers' funds, money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank-
All right, if there's no further comments, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes. Thank you all. Let's go to